Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today for this panel discussion on data privacy, data security, and how it translates to local and global growth. My name is Larry Yon. I am co-founder of Cyber Alliance. In this esteemed panel, we'll be having a discussion today where we'll be exploring, some of the best practices that these companies have been utilizing to be able to secure customer data, consumer data, and to be able to leverage it for an opportunity for growth. You'd be hard pressed today to find any industry in the world that is leveraging technology, that is not leveraging technology as a way to globalize, as a way to be able to operate faster and service their customers quicker, and then to be able to work across borders. But when we think about data security, it's not just an African problem, it's a global problem. But being able to solve these challenges in Africa has to be done from an African context. So this panel of esteemed colleagues, I'll give them a chance to introduce themselves, but they will definitely have a very interesting conversation today with a lot of perspective, a lot of insight and experience from a global perspective, some of the benchmarked strategies that have been used around the world. And again, as we transform Africa to this new global economy, it'll be very important for us to really be able to tackle early on in the process the objective of being able to protect and secure data. So each of you, I'll give you an opportunity to introduce yourselves, and then we'll jump right in.
Hey everybody, my name is Wale Anyatoye. I'm the Global Head of Product Compliance and Risk Management at Florida Wave. Prior to joining Florida Wave, I used to lead the global expansion for Square and Cash App. And it's nice to be back within the Africa ecosystem and expanding e-commerce, Africa and beyond. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Lonnie Harris. I am also the co-founder of Cyber Alliance. Prior to actually founding Cyber Alliance, I've spent probably about 25 years in the cybersecurity space, as well as the VP of Privacy Engineering at Equifax in the United States as well. Pleasure to speak with you all today.
I'm John Tanui, CEO of Consa Technopolis Development Authority. This is a government agency building a Kenya smart city called Consa Technopolis. We are building a smart city from a greenfield. Before that, I've been in the ICT industry, working building the telecom infrastructure for telecommunication and also support banking industry and other such ICT infrastructure. Thank you.
Hello everyone, a pleasure to be here. My name is Viola Llewellyn. I'm the co-founder and president of Avamba Solutions, Inc. It is a trade tech innovation company that provides platforms, dashboards, and other technologies for the African market to drive financial inclusion. Our head offices are in Cameroon and Chevy Chase, Maryland, and we are present in Egypt and Ivory Coast as well. Just a quick comment, I love the fact that this is the East African Chamber of Commerce, but we actually represent what Africa represents, which is a brain trust from around the continent. We have African Americans, Nigerians, Cameroonians, and we have somebody who is from there. So it's exciting to be here and an honor. Thank you.
Thank you. So as you see, we'll have a very interesting conversation. So I'll open with a question to the panel. From a perspective of data, right? Data is considered the new oil, right? And it's definitely the biggest currency. What does data privacy and protection mean to each of you in today's landscape?
Do you want me to go first?
Absolutely, jump in.
Yeah. The truth is that we live in a world of data as of today. When you want to build a product, because I'm in product compliance, and part of my job is to analyze and understand data, how and where the gaps are in our products, how can we build new products for new consumers. But at the end of the day, when you have access to all of these data, where do you draw the lines on how to use the data in such a way where it doesn't affect the consumers? Today, when people go online with their mobile phone, Africa has one of the youngest age group globally as of today. So there's a lot of people that is on the mobile phone. There's a lot of e-commerce platforms as of today. When you have access to all of these, that is a ton of data that you're looking at. Now, the question is, how do you ensure that these data are protected? Because believe it or not, behind those data there are real people. And that is where Flutterwave, the InfoSec team, the product compliance team comes in, drawing that line and understanding that it's not just about numbers, it's about the real people behind those numbers.
Just to piggyback a little bit on what Wale said around the data privacy and protection piece of it, at Cyber Alliance, we look at it from the lens as well, from the plumbing layer. How do we start looking at it from the security aspects of how do you secure the infrastructure piece of it? So we want to make sure that we have a strong infrastructure in place first and foremost, so then we can overlay the privacy controls that we need to be able to adhere to in order to protect the data. And I guess another component for us also is understanding the people aspects. People's care about around what they care for in terms of the privacy of their data changes over time. So we want to make sure that we stay abreast in terms of what is it that we're trying to protect in terms of the people, and then be able to have those conversations back into the private sector and the public sector so we can start expanding what type of regulations need to put in place. But for us, again, at Cyber Alliance, we're really looking at making sure your plumbing's in place, standardized, following frameworks, then overlaying your privacy controls in place. And then another piece of it is also making sure we build that talent to be able to go and support what it takes to be able to manage the data going forward.
Yeah, it's right. Data is the new oil. Quite a lot of data is being generated. There is a high penetration rate in various countries across Africa through mobile communication, the usage of mobile money, and many other uses, even the coming of smart cities. And so there is a lot of data that can be commercialized. So destination, and in respect to what we do in Kenya, especially Consa Technopolis, we are preparing a location that we want to host critical infrastructure that support data storage, to host data centers, multi-user data centers. We just completed the national data center at Consa Technopolis. And what are the concerns in respect to safety? One is at the policy level. Do we have sufficient legal framework, policy guidelines that will create an attractive environment that multinational and other businesses can entrust their data to be stored in Kenya? So that's one thing. And Kenya came up with data protection bill, which is now operationalized and is creating certain level of comfort, but it also created again certain requirement for certain data that must be hosted locally, creating an additional requirement or building capacity locally, addressing issues, ensuring there is global certification to ensure certain standards are compliant, working with the right partners, vendors, to ensure that in that sector we are able to guarantee the users' safety. And also we're looking at how to bring more partners to see how that data can generate revenue, but again, in compliance to data protection.
Data is the new oil. But if you remember your history well, before there was oil, there was a gold rush. Look at San Francisco. There was a rush. There was a mad, crazy race at it, and it was slightly disorganized. This time around, human beings are doing a little bit better. For me, this whole topic is around the impact to the human beings, but it also gives us an opportunity to look at data from other perspectives. It allows us to make sure that those people involved in this new gold rush that is about data have the right tools from the African perspective. For us, running a race is not about being in a Ferrari. It might just be a camel. The terrain that needs to be built, to your point about the plumbing and the infrastructure, has to be done right, and it has to be done in such a way that it has cultural relevance across the continent to all those that are either using it, accessing it, or trying to understand it. For Ovamba, we started out looking for information that could be turned into data. So when people say data is difficult to find in Africa, that isn't true. You need to understand that its presentation is slightly different from what you would expect in other places that have had a much higher arc of development. So for us, it's not just the humans. We're risk-oriented as a company. We're looking at data around risk, inventory, assets, and cultural behaviors around repayability, which really is where the oil is. How can you use data to find the best customer for your products in such a way that it is win-win and continues to promote a healthy narrative around Africa via the portal of data?
And that's a good point, right? I think that when we are talking about data as a means for growth, right, then we're synonymously also talking about data from a perspective of cyber trust. Because when you have that infrastructure in place that Lonnie mentioned, then you're able to translate that into global trust of your cyberspace. So as a panelist, when you think about that, have you seen any experiences where the trust of the cyberspace in Africa has prohibited growth?
Absolutely. Technology can be so simple and innocuous that you don't notice it. In fact, that's when it's at its best. So let's take the cell phone and just the simple act of making a phone call. The very first time we sat down and tried to reach customers, we made phone calls to ask them if they wanted money, and they did not want any part of that. Africans generally will not trust you if they cannot see you or associate with you. And then they want to know, at least back then, and I'm talking about 2013, 2014, and things have changed a lot. Where are your offices and can I come and see you? And we were trying to push a purely digital experience for funding businesses with money. That was not the case, and we didn't know any better. If we had known better, we would have understood that we have to use the cyberspace in such a way that we are creating a really human contact where you understand what this customer wants and to deliver to them the thing that people don't realize Africans often want. We are incredibly private oriented. I don't want you knowing what's in my pocket. I don't want you knowing who all my relatives are. I don't want you using information about me in a way that the environment doesn't have elements in place to make it punitive, dangerous, or prohibitive for you to use information about me in a way that I do not understand. Even silly stereotypes such as "don't take my picture, I don't know who you are," is a direct indication that we are very data conscious. Again, from the African perspective, it's not the same as checking on a nice little form that says, "don't send me emails." It's from the perspective of what do the realities of this particular environment dictate to how people feel safe around your interaction with them. And it doesn't matter if it's not even cyber. So that's what we've experienced.
To build off of what you just said, when the pandemic started, there's a product we had to build at FlutterWave, which is FlutterWave Store. And it's interesting because when we started FlutterWave Store, a lot of people were very conscious of it. How can I buy a product from somebody I've not met physically and trust that the product is going to be delivered in the right shape that should be delivered? And most of our prediction was around the fact that there is a pandemic ongoing. Small businesses, SMEs, have to survive. Either we like it or not, business has to move on. And we're thinking about this product is going to serve the end users. But one of the things we never took into consideration is how will the end users themselves receive it? And that is where the privacy aspect of African comes in, like you rightly mentioned. We might not have a standardized regulations around privacy, but an average African understands privacy. That is why you can be speaking to your cousin today who is traveling to America tomorrow, but he or she is never going to tell you. And then the next thing you hear is the person is in America already. Either we like it or not, definition of privacy can be very subjective, depending on where you find yourself and among the people which you interact with. So either we like it or not, subconsciously while growing up, an average African is conscious of data protection. But back to the entire end use of the product that we launched, we had to make people understand that yes, change can be scary, but in this generation, in this time, change is something that we have to embrace. And you just have to trust the people who are introducing this change, that the end users joy and happiness and comfort, it is what we have at the back of our mind as well.
Is it okay to ask him a question?
Sure.
In your opinion, especially Flutterwave and what you've just said, do you think that there is a difference in how, quote unquote, Africans approach privacy depending on who's talking to them about it, if it's the government versus a private operator? I hope you don't mind.
I think all of us already know the answer to that.
Just thought I'd ask.
I think
There are government officials here.
but it came back to what we were discussing before this panel discussion, which is about trust. It is not just about what you're selling to me. It is about, can I trust the person that is selling it to me? Because either we like it or not, a new generations of Africans are emerging, building off of what our forefathers have done, but just doing it in a different way by leveraging on technology. Just by the press of a button in the comfort of my room, I can reach thousands of customers. We're here today and we're speaking to an audience globally somewhere around the world. So at the end of the day, it is not just about what you're selling, it is about who is selling it.
Africa is going through a very significant transformation and is represented through digitization, because we've come from a lot of legacy recording and we have to do quite significant digitization. Also, we are going through a process of automation with a desire to bring efficiency, effectiveness of service delivery, whether it is in private sector and public sector. But one critical thing, as you put, is trust. How do we build trust? Because we've suffered also from cyber attacks. We've seen government systems going down, and this creates a further mistrust on the infrastructure and the online infrastructure. So we've got to do something to enhance this trust. And quite a lot has been done in the banking sector to see people willing to really transact online, although there's still some cases of cyber attacks or cyber security risks. But we must work that journey as Africa, because it's true proving through service delivery experiences of the users that they can gain more trust in such systems. And one other important thing is, you see, with public sector, as you, that question, whether is it public sector or private sector, I think in Africa there is no one country which has accepted to use online for elections, for example, because of that's the real measure of trust. The president of Estonia visited Kenya, and she was able to share the great story. And that would be a real level of measure. And we're asking, how long would it take us? And says maybe 20 years. So you can imagine the journey we have to walk to build on trust in terms of the infrastructure. And it has to take both the policymakers, the vendors, the solution providers, the private sector to walk this journey and ensure also we have the capacity and the people to secure and give that required service to the level desired.
Let me chime in for a minute. Having been a part of some of the largest breaches in the U.S. and helping kind of remediate those, I guess building back the trust, something I would ask is we have to figure out, how do we start to follow some type of guidance around frameworks and policy? I keep going back to that because in order for us, even at CAs, we start looking at, trust but verify techniques. We want to look at what does it mean to be trustworthy partners, meaning your cybersecurity infrastructure in place. There are certain frameworks that we're adhering to at Cyber Alliance that demonstrate that we now are able to say, all right, I know who's on my network. I know who's moving data in and out of my network. As we transform from on-prem into the cloud, I know the data that's moving in my cloud environments. All these are having been defined around different types of frameworks. So Africa has an opportunity to not only leverage some from the mistakes and learn from mistakes that we've seen globally, but you have opportunity to start to help define your own frameworks. You also then have opportunity to start defining what does data privacy mean. And we have the technologies you mentioned in place now, we can go in and start to measure and monitor the effectiveness of those types of frameworks and controls in order to start to build that trust verification system now. And that's what we're doing now in Cyber Alliance in terms of how do we start to build these trust indicators into our products, into even some of the training we'd put in place. But it really starts off with how do we start defining what is trust and where do we start from? And that goes back to, we got to make sure we're building our moat correctly first around our castle before we can start protecting the data on the people on the inside. So that goes back to, we definitely got us having the conversation around how do we leapfrog the rest of the world in order to define what those trust metrics are going to be, in order to start being able to say, I really feel comfortable doing business with people from abroad, internally, and going forward. But I just want to make sure we have to realize we have opportunity here with Africa to leapfrog the rest of the world.
So do you feel that there's a common or mistaken belief that Africa isn't doing enough in terms of data security and data privacy?
That is an interesting question. I always say it is very easy to sit in the US, to sit in Canada, to sit in the UK, in Australia, and predict that you understand what the African issue is. Myself as an example, I've never had a chance to work within the African ecosystem until I joined Florida Wave. And coming in, I have an idea of what I think it is. But when I got in, I realized that I know nothing. And I had to admit that. So it's very easy when you speak with many of financial institutions here in the West, and when they start speaking about Africa, the first thing they always tell you is, oh, one of the reasons why we've not explored the African ecosystem is because of the risk. The question is, what risk? Do you even understand what the risk is? If we want to start talking about data breaches, the biggest of them happen on this side of the globe. If we want to start talking about cyber fraud, financial crime, which is my area of expertise, I've lived in Estonia, by the way. I lived there for 4 years. And it's very interesting that you see people have this stereotypical idea of what Africans are and start talking about, oh, we don't want to go into Africa because there is a lot of financial frauds there in Africa. We can go back to the pre-colonial era, which we're not going to do, which is not the context of this conversation. But the truth is that Africans, are we doing enough? Yes, we are. Can we do more? Yes, we can. Just like every continent and every country, there is always room for improvement. Like I said, my job is product compliance. And when the product guys want to launch product, they're going to say, oh, we're about to go into the market, one of the best products. And I'm like, give me 30 minutes with your product and I'm going to tear it apart. That is my job. And it is the same way when you look at Africa from the eyes or from the lens of an outsider, you can always think about some of the political instability in some of the countries. But we also cannot be blindsided by the fact that even here in the West, there's a lot of political instabilities as well. Every country, every landscape, every people have their own problem. But for us as Africans, we have an opportunity here to define, to shape and determine and direct the solutions that will bring to an African issue.
Fact of the matter is, Africans are the first victims of identity theft, right? It's a fact. This is not a conversation about colonialism, but it does have a direct impact on where we're going digitally. Not being able to trace provenance to a point of origin so that you can be sure about the foundation of your next digital step is a reality in data development. My perspective on this, and I love what you just said, because even though sitting in Cameroon make all kinds of assumptions about what's going on the other side with Nigerians, most of which is highly inaccurate and is actually a reflection of ourselves. So that's what happens when you point the finger. But going back to your comments around the whole digital thing, it's really important because if we don't start to pay attention to the world patterns around some of these data disruptions, the first thing that will happen to Africans when we become the next victims of digital poverty, when we start to suffer from data divisions, where we don't have the ability to provide the right kind of access, the rules and the guide rails by which to create a future and our products that will give us the ability to be wealthy and stable. And that's when you start to hear the West say, Africa is not taking care of its data or digital responsibilities. It's because we've got a bit of a wobbly platform that we're standing on. And we're not always developing these products or these ideologies from our own perspective, but maybe co-opting, borrowing from outside in order to jerry-rig something that will work for us. We do need those of us in the diaspora and those of us working together with regulators and infrastructure to ensure that the world has a very clear perspective on how tight a grip we have on our own data sovereignty, on our own digital identities, so that we're not sitting on a stage again talking about the impact of colonialism on a future that we now have some control over.
So you're going to respond.
Yeah, one comment you asked, is Africa doing enough? And I think there is quite a lot that's happening, given where we were and the progress we need to make. One of the critical things is connectivity to the global infrastructure. And you can see a lot of efforts across Africa, submarine cables to connect to the rest of the world. There's a lot of efforts and joint efforts amongst several countries to address that. Then the other one is about hosting facilities. How many data centers across Africa receive global certification or receive host to be able to host data for the global giants and to be able to serve Africa? The other question is, what percentage of data do we really host as Africa of our data that we use? So that's a gap that we need to address to ensure we create sufficient facilities across Africa so that we can host a certain percentage. We said data is the new oil. So if we generate data and we release that oil to other hands, that means we are not going to be the beneficiaries. So Africa must really look at a certain and addressing the issue of infrastructure to host data centers, and also applications to guarantee cybersecurity processes. You find all these are generated and we are consuming. We are not playing sufficient role in creation, and that's the reason we need to look at the aspect of innovation in Africa, so that we are part of the creators of solutions to address cybersecurity. We must still, of course, collaborate with global tech giants, but African indigenous startups must rise up to the occasion and play a role in this. The other thing is we have science parks across Africa, which are going to be the centers of creation of new knowledge in Africa and be part of the global knowledge. So Africa needs to work on those areas so that we need to move out just being consumer, but also make a contribution as Africa to the global challenges. As you say, cybersecurity is not an African problem, it's a global problem, but what is Africa doing to address it, not only as a user, but also as a solution provider?
Well, I think that you may raise a very interesting point, right? And you have John has a very interesting perspective in terms of data centers and things of that nature. But each of you, data security is going to mean something different in your respective businesses. So if you think about being able to translate this and transpose this for the audience, how are you respectively developing this culture of data security within your organizations?
Let me jump in first. I think we have to slow down, first of all. We're trying to get to the money before we get to understanding the value of the money, per se. So I look at it from the perspective of Africa has opportunity again, if we step back and figure out what is it we're trying to protect in terms of cybersecurity. The breach is not about the breach. It's about somebody didn't understand the value, what it is they're supposed to protect. They didn't know what crown jewels was. Because if you didn't know this was crown jewels, it could be sitting here in plain sight. And I didn't have to put any type of controls in place to protect it. But if you knew it was a crown jewels, what do I need to do to protect this? Do I need to encrypt it? Do I need to anonymize it? Do I need to, as we see now, we start to delete certain things. What I'm trying to get to, how much do we need to minimize the data in order for it not to be sitting out in plain sight? Because they're going to get inside of your networks. But it's up to you to figure out, how do I protect this or hide this piece of gold in order for, if you do hack into me, you still don't know what you're supposed to be getting. So that's where we come in and talk about, how do you classify your data? How do we minimize the data? How do we work on transferring data between boundaries? Or if we do it, the whole geo-boundary aspects of it, how do we go about understanding the data life cycle? When is it time to retain, delete, erase data? And that all stems from, putting regulations in place. But those are the types of questions we got to ask as we start talking about this whole data, being the new gold or the new commodity. All the controls in place are not going to protect it if you cannot put any type of thinking and thought around how do I really protect the data if somebody was to get inside the house. So slow down a little bit and start thinking about it from that aspect.
I think I'm going to take her from there. You asked the question initially, do people trust if it is from government or is it from private sector? I think when the government and the private sector start thinking in uniformity, it makes a lot of things easier. Private sectors will think about reputational risk and reputational damages. Because when you have customers on your platform who are transacting using Flutter as an example, if there's a data breach, then we lose a whole new potential customers coming on board, and we also lose existing customers. When we have that fear at the back of our mind, then we have no choice but to do right, even if we don't want to, which in this case we actually want to and we do. But does the government have the same level of fear that we do? Do they care about reputational damages and reputational risk? If the answer is yes, then it makes these things easier. There are certain part of Africa today that as private sectors, when we go into, you'll be surprised that InfoSec rules, data privacy rules does not even exist. We have to create one ourselves in that market. Not because the government requires us to do that, but because we understand that we have an end users on our platform who we have an obligations to protect. And then most importantly, we have shareholders and stockholders on our platform. And the moment there's a data breach, there is a whole lot of monetary values that we lose. So I think the moment, back to what I said, I think the moment the government and the private sector start thinking in uniformity, then we can start making a huge leap towards data protection and data privacy.
The most secure piece of data that could ever exist in the world is that which sits on a typewriter in a closed room with no door and no window. And that's never going to happen, is it? Therefore, from a Avamba's perspective, we're very concerned with server safety, especially when speaking with banks who can't use public clouds or servers, and making sure that they are safe using our technology. We are also very concerned with the smart innovations around edge technology, fracturing databases, anonymization. Everything that you said was the articulation of what we do, but didn't realize how important it is to be able to phrase language around that in order to convey that sense of trust and safety. And your point about working with the government, it's true. Dear government people, you'll never catch us. We're much faster than you. And the only people faster than us are the criminals. So really, it's not a case of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, but it really is a case of the regulations can't always keep up with technology and innovation. And the approach of over-regulating and being punitive as a way to try to deter actually does not work. It just drives people to be smarter, faster, quicker. So I think that based on, especially what you've said, Lonnie, that the fact that many of us self-police is a good thing. The invitation to governments, regulators, and policymakers to take a peek behind the curtain at how very cohesive the private sector is when it comes to these matters could be very helpful, especially for central banks and policymakers. But to go beyond the whole sandbox ideology, to sit and really just take a look at and try to take a cue from the private sector on these matters, on how to create the best policies for all sectors, I think it'd be a really huge win and set an example to the rest of the world. I don't know, again, who's looking over the hedgerow at other countries. We're all so busy with our own knitting, so to speak. But there is an opportunity for those that self-police to create an alliance that sets a very good standard, especially in light of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement.
When you look at the data, as discussed here, also we have the different kind. There's the data generation, those who create all this data. There's the data storage of those who host data. There is also the different users in processing this data for different usage. So when you look at the policy, self-regulatory, whether it is industry standards and all that. So it requires an interaction of all these actors to ensure to build a trust in the system and also to ensure that in the case of Africa is that there is a continuous educational efforts to ensure that the various actors really know what it means. I think it was pointed at times you do not know what that data means unless there's some sufficient education, because we were looking at in the situation of Kenya, we recently came up with a data protection bill. It's a very recent bill, that act of parliament that came into place, and it's bringing very serious obligation to different data handlers at different roles. We have people releasing their personal data in the manual, what you mentioned, maybe in writing, in hand, but sometimes this data landing in the wrong hands can end up being a criminal action and a real impact to even businesses. So education and bringing all the actors together is going to be very critical, especially for Africa.
Let me say one thing, and I'm gonna tie it up in terms of the privacy versus protection. If you was to build a car, what would be probably the first thing you would think about when you're going to build a car for people to use? I would, engine, what about from a safety standpoint? The brakes. I would think about the brakes first and foremost, because I'm kind of thinking about the people aspects of it. What am I trying to protect? So I look at it from the standpoint of it's a balance between what the private sector as well as what the public sector as well as what our government is going to be responsible for. And what I'm getting to, we got to think about around privacy as well. We got to think about privacy by default, privacy by design. You would not build a product that would have the password in clear text or no password at all. You wouldn't build a product where the password is just password. There's certain things by default you should think about when it comes to privacy as well as, how do we protect the end user? So the balance act of being able to say, does the government own it? Does the private sector own it? As you mentioned, the government lags behind innovation. They're waiting on the private sector, and that's what drives innovation. So they're really looking for us to be able to find what regulation we need to put in place, what types of safety and control we need to put in place, and form those types of relationships. But it really starts with the private sector first, putting forth the effort to think about, when I design a product, I want to take you in control or make you feel comfortable knowing that when you turn on this device or you turn on this camera, it's not going to automatically start recording and start sending information. It's going to wait, pause, ask you to go in and set it up, put a password on it, put your phone number associated with it so I know who you are. All those things are part of the privacy by design thought. And so that's something else we got to think about. Don't get too far ahead of yourself again. Think about from the aspects of how do we protect the people first in everything we do?
Well, I'm an Africa optimist. So I believe that Africa is going to get to the place where it will be seen globally for its global cyber trust faster than I think people would expect for it to be just naturally. So if I change speeds a bit, how do you all feel Africa will benefit from having this global cyber trust in its ability to raise capital, its ability to attract new customers, things of that nature? What is the role of global cyber trust in Africa going to have on entrepreneurs and smart cities and their ability to be able to raise capital and secure new customers?
You can have the best product, but if people don't trust your product, it's still not going to sell. So back to your question, trust is essentially important. Like I mentioned earlier, people talk about risk in Africa, risk that they don't even understand. But in my space, in compliance, when you look at different countries in terms of risk ratings, it is always interesting that Africa is always on the high risk ratings, like African countries. And you wonder who did the rating. People who have never been on the shore of Africa. People who even think that Africa is a country. These are the people that design the risk rating for Africa. So I think when we start having conversations such as this, and we start a whole educational processes for people to understand more about African and Africans, then we can start having different conversation in a different light. We were discussing earlier about mobile money. I never knew anything about mobile money. I just started working for Florida Wave. And it makes a whole lot of sense because there are people who are in the villages who are far away from banks and they still have to transact. Mobile money solves the problem. But when you're talking to partners on this side, and we start talking about how we have different ways in which people can transact, mobile money is one of them, then they start saying, is that something like QR code? And I'm like, no, it's not. This is different. So I think the more we have educative conversation about Africa and Africans, and people started understanding how we do things, the truth is that people will never be receptive to what they don't understand. It's a natural human factor to be afraid of what you don't understand. When you understand, you're going to be like, oh, it makes perfect sense now. It's not as difficult as I thought it was going to be. So I think when we start having that conversation, then more investors are going to start coming into Africa. The truth is that more investors are coming into Africa already. As of today, Africa has one of the rising fintech globally. People are looking into Africa to invest. People are looking into Ethiopia. Smart City in Kenya is right there. South Africa is there. Nigeria tried to do e-money. It's commendable. So that's to let you know that as of today, the narrative is changing a little bit. Can it change faster? The answer is yes. And that is also dependent on you and I, and also the collaboration between us and the government. And I think it goes without saying this. When fintech started in Africa, many banks actually thought that fintech was a competition. And I'm like, no, we don't have to compete. We're just here to complement. So when the government starts saying that fintech and private sectors are not the competitors, that we're here to complement whatever the government is working on, we can achieve a whole lot within a short space of time.
Well, I'll each give you maybe 30 seconds to answer so that we'll have, we're going to open up questions for the audience and then be able to, we may even run a live poll for it to ask a couple questions as well.
Everything they said, there are lots of empty spaces. We have the largest youth bulge bracket. We should be a destination for outsourcing. We have a very smart, innovative group. Now, if we can only change our education curriculums and make them more vocational, entrepreneurially driven, and couched in a digital reality, we will have a continent of more than 1.2 billion human beings, none of whom can go to any of their governments to get a benefit check because they can't be bothered to go to work, but they will have the ability and just the access to create revenue and a life and be part of the global digital revolution. The world needs to pay attention. All this nonsense with sending checks and all kinds of goodies to Africa because they want to quote unquote save us, that nonsense has to come to an end eventually. We cannot live that way, and it is too big a check for the world to write if we don't make our digital goals, and that's just a fact.
He talked about e-commerce, and this is the next step to demonstrate the trust within our local different countries in confidence on the digital infrastructure. And I think quite a lot needs to be done here. One is the government services to be digitized, and the users of government services to be able to access these services and transact from wherever they are using this infrastructure. This is one key step which will help Africa to really build its internal trust. And once this confidence continues to increase, we've seen in Kenya, for example, the registration regarding motor vehicle from importing a vehicle, registering, transferring, everything happening online, renewal of your services, government services, but the cap is still huge. We need to move more services to the digital platform, and this will perform the action of educating the masses to trust this infrastructure. As we work on this also is to comply with the global standard practice, to ensure that we build the right infrastructure to attract investment, because indeed investment in Africa of digital infrastructure and services, so that we are able to access global services, and this infrastructure being located in our different countries will really hasten this process, knowledge transfers, spin-offs, and all the other benefits that will come by having the multinational and infrastructure located in Africa.
Two things. One, I think the first most critical is the talent development piece of it. We have to start the education in Africa early. If we let machine learning and AI take over without having the biases coming from an African aspects of it, it's always going to have somebody else's look and feel. So we got to make sure we think about the talent and education piece behind, and then to your point, the globalization around the standards piece of it. We got to be able to say that, in order for me to trust that business, it's got to be some standard conversation that we all are following the same framework. And we have opportunity in Africa to actually define that now, so we can make sure that we know the products that we're putting into our infrastructure, into our data centers, into our cloud environments, have gone through some type of certification that we all can agree upon. Okay.
Are there any questions from the audience? Do they need a mic?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'll come back to you.
Okay.
We'll come back.
Thank you very much. My name is Rebecca Kadaga. I'm the Deputy Prime Minister of Uganda, the Minister for East African Community. Now, I don't know which of you was last on the African continent. When were any of you on the African continent?
When were we last on the African continent?
Yes.
2020.
2022. I was in Senegal, Dakar, in April of this year.
Okay.
I live in Africa.
Okay, so
3 weeks ago.
I don't want you to give the impression that Africa is asleep. It's not true. First of all, the International Telecommunications Union is headed by an African. He's called Patrick Masambo. He's a Ugandan. I also want to ask, have you done an audit in the East African countries about our level of digitalization? An audit? I doubt it.
With due respect.
No, please, madam. I allowed you to speak. Let me.
Of course, please.
Yes. So, my friend was talking about the digital law. Very recent. In Uganda, it's more than 10 years old. So we are quite advanced in many ways. We are digitalized. Yes, we're not perfect, but progress has been made. So it's not good to show them, to give an impression that, we need to be pushed and we are moving. In the West African community, Rwanda is the IT leader in East Africa. I don't know whether you know that. Rwanda. Yes. So please, talk relating to examples. Don't be general. We're talking about East Africa. What is the situation in East Africa? Where are our digital legislation? Where are we? What are investments in the digital era in our countries? I think that's what we should be talking about. Yeah, thank you.
Excellency, your comments are very valid, and I'm really glad you stated them. The fact of the matter is, when we start talking about things like audit, and forgive me if my comments are offensive, they generally do lend themselves to a mindset that may be more analog than digital. So that's not always how that works in our realities as innovators and creators. The second point I would make is the digital landscape somehow provides an ease where borders not so much a problem. So when you find the Flutterwaves of this world and other companies and Cyber Alliance and even November, and we're talking about Africa, it's because we see the positive and we have really had a wonderful run with it. But we can't have growth and profit without challenges, issues, problems. Now, we do talk about them in these hallowed forums. And let me tell you on a personal basis, when I started Avamba, I made it a rule. Anything negative to be said about Africa, I'm only talking about that with other Africans. I am not going out to bash our continent with anybody. It does damage on such a systemic level, it is untold. And in a digital reality, that damage is even quicker. So we are always very responsible. So I appreciate your comments. But the truth of the matter is, it's okay to talk about how great Africa is because there's so much of it that is, but we're here to also create solutions to challenges that can drive monetization, IP monetization, profit, and growth. It doesn't come when we're only talking about the groovy things. So we look to people like yourselves to hold us accountable, to push the envelope, walk side by side with us, and urge their colleagues to move a little faster, because you obviously care as much as we do. And I'm very grateful for your comments today, and apologies for earlier interrupting you.
Can I speak real quick to that? Thank you for your comment, by the way. Like I mentioned earlier, I said when fintech started, the bank actually thought we're competitors. When we talk about data privacy and protections, we're not here to compete with the public sectors. We're here to work together. The truth is that we as private sectors, there is limit to what we can do without the partnership of the government. We are not the one that's going to create the regulations. We are not the one that it is a job to work with the government sectors and say, okay, there's an opportunity here for us to create the regulations. How can we work together? Because for me as a manager and as a leader, I always say when there is a disconnect between the people that are being led and the people that are leading, whatever policy is being created is just going to be as good as on paper. It's not going to have the effects. So I commend the ECT that is being being developed. There is other African countries that are developing as well. Like I mentioned earlier, can we move faster? The answer is yes. Is there opportunity for growth? The answer is yes. But we also understand that growth is not just one-way dimensional. We all are Africans, and we have an opportunity to change the narrative and build something better than our forefathers did. So that is why we're having this conversation. Not sitting here pointing fingers, throwing stones and say the government is not doing enough. Who are the government? We are part of the government. And like she rightly mentioned, if I'm going to talk to Africa, if I'm going to talk about African or what is not working in Africa, you better believe I'm not going to talk to non-Africans. And for me as a Nigerian, I'm going to state this clearly. I work in the fintech space. I've been in rooms where nobody looks like me, where nobody speaks like me. And when people think, the first thing they always say is, you're an African, huh? You're a Nigerian. Why are you into this cybersecurity thing? Many Nigerians are fraudsters. It's a stereotype. And we can only change that when we work together. So we're not throwing stones at you, man. Okay.
I think just to mention one issue, Excellency, I think put one important point that indeed, and she has emphasized, Africa has made certain strides, great significant. If you look, for example, connectivity, which is critical for all this to happen. You come to a city like Nairobi, I think if you measure us by any indexes, whether it is data speeds, all that, we would fare as good as any top city in the world. Yeah, but it does not mean there aren't gaps to be addressed. It means also there are other areas, because the other question is, what part of the global space of the digital economy are we actually a serious stakeholder? Then you realize we are just handling the smallest component. What part of global applications that we use, WhatsApp, Facebook, all that, what percentage are we hosting or transacting in Africa? How do we make? So that's the gap that we need to address, to say, How do we walk that journey? When we discuss like this, talking about solutions and the applications that we consume, what percentage of this is actually indigenous to us? And those are the areas we need to work on, so that if we even digitizing our governments, we can say 30% of the applications are actually locally created and they're integrating with global platforms. And that's the journey probably Africa needs to work, and I think the discussions to be in that direction. But indeed, a lot of progress has been made in Africa. The right infrastructure is in place, the direction is right, but quite a lot needs to be done, and the speed needs to be faster.
Absolutely. And I appreciate the question as well.
That's such a rich conversation. We could continue for hours doing this, and I really hope we can continue this after the session in the lunch second. But I want to take some time to recognize that today, October 9th, is Uganda's Independence Day.
Congratulations.
And I'd like to recognize our Honorable Deputy Prime Minister. Thank you for being here, and we want to recognize your presence here and celebrate Uganda's Independence Day today.
Happy Independence Day.
Happy Independence.
Yes, indeed. Yep, you want to say a few words?
Yes.
Okay.
I wanted to ask the Ugandans to stand up and sing one stanza of the national anthem. Even the neighbors. Okay, all the neighbors.
Today.
Oh, Uganda, may God uphold thee. We lay our future in thy hands. United, free, for liberty, together we stand. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. We're grateful for you being here and leading us through that small celebration.
Thank you.
I do have a question that I wanted to just pose to the panel, and specifically to Viola. You mentioned the Continental Free Trade Agreement. Is there an opportunity to really build in the kinds of frameworks that Lonnie's talking about in the Continental Free Trade Agreement, so that it's not just a trade agreement for goods, but for building the infrastructure of the future that we need, so that trade, digital trade between countries across Africa is much easier. So what is the opportunity that you see to do that right now into the Continental Free Trade Agreement, and specifically in this context also in the East Africa community, since we're talking about East Africa here, these regional trade blocks, to build the standards across the regions so that we can facilitate digital commerce?
Lovely question. Now, if I ran the world, or if I ran Africa, here would be my hopes for that. Starting at the very bottom, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement gives us the ability to standardize digitization. It gives us the ability to standardize the physical world around us. If anybody knows me, I make these facetious videos where I call myself Africa's unofficial Minister of Stairs and Standards. That's because there is no standardization for things even like going down the stairs or medication. This will happen with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement in light of data and digital innovation, when we can get harmonization for birth recordation, identity, business visas, maybe even an African passport, and a digital currency or any other currency that is not petro-related but relates to Africa's natural resources, a change in education, and then a push for manufacturing so that we're buying from each other and not from some other location. If we do this within the context of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, and we have ourselves doing business with each other, along with harmonization of legal, business, and banking banking with fintech as an overlay around it, because fintech weaves itself through everything. After all, an ATM machine is fintech. And we all have it, we all use it. The abacus was probably considered fintech back in the day. So the future opportunity, if we can build these building blocks with each other and give each other the responsibility for contributing towards some of that, we will have a continent that is fully globalized. But the final piece of that will be when you can catch a flight from Douala to Lagos and don't have to go through bloody Togo. Okay? Because time is money. Time impacts the digital reality and the physical reality. But technology and digitalization can do all of that. And can you imagine the rich data that comes from the everyday African who can now discuss cybersecurity, data security at the same time while discussing their favorite fufu recipe? When the relativity of these topics is everyday concern, and that individual does not have to wait for paper from the government. They have a digital document, they've got a phone, it can pick up the network wherever it goes. His bank account and financial data is portable. It can be read and understood by everybody else, despite the 2,000 languages that we have on our continent. We will be very, very powerful, and we'll be very responsible global citizens. That is what African Continental Free Trade Agreement and everything that it will take to build it can give to us as human beings.
Beautiful. I can't wait to see that day.
Well, I think we're
Yes.
pretty close to it, right?
Yeah.
Because if you add that and you layer on Africa having the opportunity to own its own value chains, right? Technology gives African countries the ability to own its own value chains and create innovation for the entrepreneurs that want to do business with each other and want to get products across borders, right? That's a great opportunity to really grow the power of these varying different countries in East Africa, right? To be able to unite themselves through technology. And then it goes back to the point that Lonnie made about training and skill development and really building industries, because many of these jobs don't even exist yet. A lot of people talk about the opportunity for automation and those things to make unemployment rates that are already high even higher. But we're talking about the opportunity of being able to bring education in and skills that are completely matched to the jobs and the innovation that's going to be necessary to get to that point where the AFCTA is maximized for the benefit of all.
We have a question here. Then we have a question on the online. We'll take it next.
Hello, everyone. My name is Peter Awori. I am from Nairobi, Kenya. I am an information security analyst by profession, so I love this discussion. You have mentioned two things that are very dear to my heart. The first, I'll put it in a set. There's trust, right, and education. So I have a suggestion more for us as Africans. I have an associate's degree in computer programming. I have a bachelor's degree in computer engineering. I have a master's degree in information security policy and management, okay? And one thing that I have seen or experienced throughout all these years is that data privacy and cybersecurity is very seldomly placed in, I'll call it chapter 1 of our books, right? We want to innovate, we want to build, right? We want to create these new great things, right? Rarely is the focus or the priority on securing, right? All this data, all this building, all this innovation. You see that? So now we have a whole generation that is very data reliant and technology reliant, but doesn't really get it when it comes to the security and data privacy, right? So as we focus on education, let's incorporate, let's prioritize, right? That's really for everybody. The second thing is a question for our wonderful panelists. So some of you may know the data privacy, the general data privacy regulation. This is developed by the EU or for the EU. is designed or was created to protect the personally identifiable information, right, of European residents, right? So the type of data that identifies you, for example. Somebody spoke of privacy by design there. I like that. So when it comes to data privacy, it's looked at as, you touch on it from a data life cycle. When data is collected, when data is stored, when it is shared, and finally, when it is deleted, right? Companies, corporations, governments, right, have struggled when it comes to data deletion. And I want you guys to touch on this a little bit and help us out. We're very good at wanting to collect data. We want to process data, right, for data analytics, to help in marketing, to help in advertising, to sell our products and services more, right? But I rarely see, and I was part of a identity and access management team with PricewaterhouseCoopers a while ago, and the struggle came when the solution was being sought for how to properly destroy data, when you no longer need this data that you've collected, that you've used to help your business, right? For you guys, what have you seen, what have you experienced, right, that has worked when it comes to data destruction? At the same time, what challenges have you faced or have you seen organizations facing when it comes to data destruction? You can speak on this from a policy perspective, and you can also speak on it from an infrastructure or technology perspective.
So I'll take the question first. Thank you for bringing up GDPR. It presents a unique opportunity for everyone to look at it from the aspects of, do we want it to be a global requirement, or do we want it to be sectorial, is what we have in the States, of course, around the sectorial piece of it. So from the sectorial piece, what I mean is that, from the fintech market, from, the education and healthcare, they all define, how long you need to retain data. For us, I look at it from the standpoint of, how long do we need to retain the data from the standpoint of, if it were to be breached and obtained, what will be the ramifications to the individual? So it's kind of hard to put a guardrails that say, should it be 5 years, 3 years? Does legal say, some laws say 7 years, you're supposed to retain data. But for me, it's, why do you still need to have my social security number sitting on a server somewhere after you've already done the credit check for the cell phone? So I don't need for government to tell me that, you should only keep it 1 year, 5 years, 7 years. Once you've gone through and done the purpose, and we talked about the data life cycle, there's an aspect called purposing. What was the purpose for collecting my data? If the only purpose wasn't for you to do a credit check to determine whether or not I'm credit worthiness in order to get a cell phone, and you said, yes, get rid of my data. You don't need my cell phone, my social security number anymore. You might need my address, it's in the bill now. So some of this becomes to a point where I don't need government to tell me to do something that makes common sense in terms of the whole data lifecycle piece of it. So like I say, I've been a part of some pretty large fintechs and startup companies in general who've been around, who've been breached and all that. At the same time, they got breached because what? They didn't have security in place to protect passwords that were sitting in the clear text, or passwords that were called password. And then someone got in and pivoted and breached their whole system. So had they deleted the password that was sitting on the ISOs or in the analyst or in the, in our head of IT on his system, and it was sitting in the clear text, we wouldn't have had the problem. So I didn't need for government to tell me, delete the password. So a couple things. One, we can wait for it to be global, like a GDPR that says you must maintain it for X number of years, or we can say it's going to be sectorial based, but we have to be smart again in terms of how we design our systems in order to protect the data through the life cycle from ingestion to destruction. And how we go about destroying it, yeah, we can talk about techniques, but again, it goes back to think the common sense piece of it in terms of what was the original purpose for you collecting the data, and is that purpose been served? And after that purpose is served, get rid of the data.
Okay, we have an online question that we want to take, can we?
We've
flash it?
had
Okay.
somebody who's been
Yes,
waiting.
this will be the last question we'll take. So we'll take the online question we say is how to protect local jobs and protect from abuse of employees' hours as the world opens up to virtual or remote jobs. It's about protecting employees from abuse as we become virtual. Anybody wants to take that?
Yeah, we actually at the beginning of the pandemic thought, yay, we're going to be really rich. We're going to go to all the banks and the partners we've been speaking to and explain to them that our product will allow them to manage productivity of their customers, of their staff. But the first thing that we forgot is many banks don't allow you to remote into bank systems, let alone even have a port for a thumb drive on a laptop or a computer. So that was always going to be a problem. We provide software as a service with our system. And one of the things that we have when we show demos that shock people is we actually pay attention to where the employee may be working from, and we have to be able to see in lifetime what work is being performed. We provide that to users of our system. So that's because during COVID, it was a real issue. How do you plan and protect productivity? In fact, the first people that we showed our technology to for productivity management were the Kenyans. And you didn't want it. Oh well. But they did see the utility of it, and we were able to continue to keep that as a module within the system. But there are simple ways in which to do that, and we've got that embedded in our tech, but it's really a big problem.
One thing also I need to mention about the jobs, it's about protecting jobs, but I think we should also be of that reality that there will be a lot of transformation. Certain jobs will change based on new designs in built in the cybersecurity of systems. So it's about reworking the issue of education to re-educate the various people so that we don't look so that automation do not kick you, then you see yourself losing your job. So I think there is that element too. Yeah.
Okay, we have a last comment here, and then we're going to have to close the session. So
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Sylvester Luech. I'm Kenyan. I live here in the Metroplex. I just have brief comments. One, Telebir launched mobile money this year in Ethiopia. And in the first week, they had 1.2 million subscribers. That's fintech. M-Pesa in Kenya has changed the lives of at least 2.5% of individuals in that country, fintech. Harvard Business Review this year did a very detailed article that Nairobi, Kenya is becoming the fintech hub of the world, not Africa. That's fintech. Then we look at all this connectivity that can change Africa. But how many people read Harvard Business Review? So our problem with Africa is not the gap of the effort. It's the gap in propaganda, agitation, and control of the narrative. And this is where we must focus. And because it's about mindset, I would say I'm an economist because I'm an accounting major. I'm a business person, but I study psychology and behavioral science. And I've known that all wars are won and lost in the mind. So I've started studying mind and use of words a lot. You use words for three things: create intent, control intent, or conceal intent. So as long as we let other people control the African narrative, we will lose the war. So what are we going to do about it? You as panelists, what are you going to do about it? I stopped whining. I started doing something about something I feel can be changed. So what am I doing about Africa? October last year, I launched a publication called Success Africa. Africa is written with a K. What am I saying there? I'm not criticizing any government or anyone from Africa. There are enough people doing that. What I'm doing there is pick one little success, however little it is, and tell it from an African perspective. So you panelists and everybody here, what are you going to do about it?
Well, I think we all can
Excellent.
Going
give
is,
a couple
what
cents.
have we been doing?
Go for it.
I think that was a very, very good statement and comment. I think part of it is true. One of the challenges for Africa that it has to do is be able to control its own narrative and to tell its own story. And I think part of that, and as panelists, we've all had successful opportunities. We've all had successful experiences. And part of controlling that narrative is people like us speaking to people who don't have a context of Africa about those successes, and having enough of that content out all the time and at a level of frequency where it becomes common knowledge that good experiences in Africa are synonymous, right? As opposed to people who've never come to Africa, who have no experience in Africa or no connection with Africa, being able to tell the story of what African is or what it can be. So I think all of us are kind of taking that and have the ability to be able to speak to those types of individuals in a way where we are talking about the good things that are possible and that have happened based on our own experiences. And I don't think any of us would be where we are if we didn't have those experiences, those good, positive experiences about the continent.
Have you ever seen my hashtag? Hashtag this ain't your granddaddy's Africa. That's a warning to Africans, not the outside world, that we need to foster our narrative and change it. But I want you to notice every last one of the persons on this panel said the same thing in different ways. The human beings, the impact to humans, what is going on with people, how people can experience, how people can grow, how they can change, and how they can bequeath the value of what they are doing, not just the digital world, but in the real world. So this is an important thing that I'm beginning to see, that there are, especially with Nairobi and the GSM report that I think we're just shy of 500 hubs right now, trying to make sure that in the desperation to be part of this new gold rush, that people are not innovating just for the sake of innovation. They're not just copycatting for the sake of copycatting with no understanding of what the end goal is. We're seeing a better appreciation and application of innovation and technology to solve real challenges. So the question isn't what are we going to do about it, it's what's being done. There's a book, you seem to like reading, about the underreporting of Africa's numbers and the fact that data is not collected in the right way. But this is why we're having this panel. This is why Cyber Alliance exists and other groups like that, to ensure that the policymakers and the world at large understands that we are capable of being accurate with numbers, and that all of these activities actually have a secondary impact of making sure that information data about Africa is collected with accuracy. Not just so policymakers can do a better job, but so that the outside world can understand our gang's bigger than yours. And it's not just bigger, it does a lot. It delivers a lot of value. So I really like what you're doing. I myself am particularly interested in at the intersection of ethnicity, culture, tribe, psychology, and wealth. That's why I do what I do, why I stick around and keep on keeping on, because it's so very important. The narrative is ours to tell, and I love what you're doing.
Just to add on this, he's put a very important point. No one will say our story until we speak our story. And I like the way he has said he has taken an effort as an individual. When a foreigner lands in Uganda and picks one of the national newspapers, what information do they learn? When he lands in Nigeria, what do they hear? And that is where maybe we ourselves are not speaking our stories clearly. We are actually speaking the opposite of what we should project of the reality of the great efforts that are going on. So I think one of the things is, as individuals, whether Africans in our African countries or in diaspora, in the platforms that we all have, is to find these stories and speak them out. Use the various opportunities that we have. At Concert Technopolis, we are part of an association called International Association of Science Parks and Places of Innovations. It brings membership of over 350 such establishments in over 70 countries. In Africa, we are formed what we call African Division, and I'm privileged to be the president of the African Division. We have Abuja, Nigeria, Abuja, the Innovation Village, Innovation Hub in South Africa, Botswana, and the others. And we start sharing our stories we are doing in areas of science. We initiated our publication to start sharing our stories because indeed our contribution is still low, but we need to encourage and speak those milestones. And recently I got opportunity to sit at the international board of that association, and that brings opportunities that we start sharing our stories as Africa. And I think that's the challenge, and we are privileged to have great Africans sitting in great platforms, is to connect to the stories and the efforts that's happening across Africa, demystify Africa being a country, to show the South Sudan, the Sudan, the East Africa, and all that. And if we speak our stories, we will motivate and encourage more great such stories to come. But if we speak negative, we will be endorsing that.
Fantastic. On that note, we're going to have to end it. Great conversation. Thank you for our panelists. Give them a really big hand. And